welcome back. We are here for our second segment with Rob Whiteman, the founder of Better Future Advisors and a former partner at McKinsey McKinsey and Company. I wouldn't call you an AI guru. That's too heavy of a title, but pretty knowledgeable about AI in multiple forms. So thanks again for joining today. What I'd love to dive into in this segment is, in my sector, Rob, as I've told you, there tends to be a lot of fight and flight going on with AI. And by that, I mean, when the topic comes up, people immediately move to algorithmic bias and deepening injustice and inequity making our society less healthy, because technology has definitely brought a mixed bag of things to us over time. And so everybody's feelings about technology just come to the fore, and about society in general. You and I talked. I think that folks in my sector, the social impact sector, the nonprofit sector, could use AI to advance their impacts and help people, and not discounting the negative that could happen and is happening with AI today in some areas. But I want to explore that potential benefits for social good with you. Can you give me your what you've seen over the past 5-10 years of being working with AI, and where you think nonprofits and social impact leaders can utilize AI to advance their mission?
Yeah, so I think, just starting out, I would say one of the things that's actually very challenging about AI is it has such broad and general applicability. It's often just hard to even know kind of where do you start. And I think that's also why the challenge of, how do you, or when do you, or do you period adopt AI? It's just it's a hard problem to wrestle with, because just getting your arms around it in so many different facets, it's just, it's daunting. But I think there's a few things that on a social sector basis can be really important. And the first thing is that I look at it and say, there's a big opportunity here to help a lot of folks in society for whatever reason they are starting from behind, or they're starting at a disadvantage. So if I grow up in a place, that maybe doesn't have as much access to economic means, or I grow up in a household where my physical or psychological security is constantly under threat, it's very difficult to kind of play the game of life starting from a place where you're like 10 spaces behind and then expected to catch up in a period of time. So I think one of the biggest benefits of AI is it is augmented intelligence, and it's fairly inexpensive. And so really focusing on access and saying, how do we get people access to all the things they need to make use of this fairly low cost intelligence to be able to use it for themselves? And that is everything from broadband access to hardware to be able to run the things, to that underlying models, to the language capabilities to be able to write things, giving people access to the tools that they need for AI, and then allowing them to be able to determine how it gets used. I think that is, number one for me, is focusing less on how people are using AI and more about, are you making sure access is widely distributed, not concentrated in the hands of the few. I think from there, then there's a lot of potential benefits to broad-based access, one of which is disruption. Look, a lot of the institutions that we built up in society, both in the private sector as well as the public and social sector, those institutions inherently create certain barriers for other people to be able to break into those institutions. Well, we know AI is going to disrupt a lot of existing institutions, and to the extent that we can make sure that disruption is evenly distributed and looks a little bit more even in society, I think that's a benefit. And that again ties back to the access point. So I think I'm not giving you like 3 things I think we should do in society, but I think really focusing less on the use cases and more on providing equitable access to AI. I think that is where I would probably put most of my energy.
That makes a lot of sense, because it will have I think they're calling this the possible second or third digital divide that we might be creating. And as a sort of an amateur political analysis, I've also seen the aggregation of power through through tech innovations and tech wealth, right? The invention of the internet and et cetera has brought a whole new set of billionaires and power companies to the table, who tend not to come from marginalized groups. They've come from groups that have pretty good access to schools and to technology and to investment opportunities, right? So it seems like you're saying, if we can avoid that other digital divide and create access points, there is a chance for better equity and equality and use.
Yeah.
Um,
And just one other follow-up on that is I'm not sure that you can truly avoid the concentration of wealth and power in some of the technology firms just by nature of what they're building. It's just it does require massive scale, requires massive amount of capital. Where you can though is create more equity in like how those platforms are used. And for me, one of the big examples of that is the creator economy. If I look at the diversity of the creator economy and who's making money in content creation today versus traditional media companies and who was making money from content creation historically, that gives me at least some hope that providing broad-based access, even though the platform owners may accumulate a disproportionate amount of share, that doesn't mean that there's not a lot of opportunity to be created and have that be more widely evenly distributed than perhaps it has been historically.
Yeah, it seems like I hear the term democratizing technology, right? That getting we got the smartphones down to a price point that almost everybody can have one, right? That there's a democratizing element to that, and it does seem like a pretty it does for the amateur person like myself. It does seem like ChatGPT a year ago and last November, I think it came out, was one of those moments where regular people like me kind of woke up and started to think about AI. Did you see it? I mean, you've been in this for 10 plus years. Were you surprised at that reaction to Chat GPT and regular people kind of waking up to its potential?
I Yes and no. So, there were versions of the underlying model. So there was a GPT-2 before there was a GPT-3.
Yes.
There were models that existed before that. That the thing that I would say even it surprised me and a lot of people in the field is just all ChatGPT is essentially a website on top of a language model that had already existed. So if you knew programming and you knew how to use what's called the API, you could use the model before ChatGPT existed. And many of us that knew some programming have been playing around with these models before that. But then the minute you put a website on it, it's 100 million people using it. So I think that, kind of going back to the point I was making around access, that is the thing, is the power of access, making that model accessible to 100 million people and not just a few 100,000 maybe programmers is the thing that really caused it to both jump in popularity and enter the public consciousness. So I think it does speak to just the ability to make things accessible to people regardless of kind of their technology proficiency.
The UX matters, right? And that design of ChatGPT and the marketing just hit perfectly. Makes me think of Steve Jobs and the iPhone, right? Realizing how to get people to consume that product. Uh, I want to get to the problem-solving potential of AI, because in the end, I'm in this sector because I see a lot of problems in society that I'd like to see improved. Um, and I'm fascinated by AI because it's like a coworker, an imbalanced coworker, and when I'm using the LMS, the Chat GPT, but it's amazingly fast, and it gives me some templates and some ideas really quickly. And I'm sure the technologies are just going to get exponentially better. And so being in this problem solving business, whether it's climate change, whether it's social inequity, whether you name the problem, how do you see social activists harness what no, I'm going to be a little more specific in this question. What tools right now do you think social activists should be using to push forward their advocacy on issues to help solve problems affecting the planet today?
Yeah. So I think there are two things that immediately come to mind. One is the ability to take things that I would say are a little are either hidden from public view or very difficult for the average person to engage on, and making those more accessible to people. So if you think about examples would be like public comment to regulatory agencies. Every time that something is being done in the banking sector, communication sector, energy sector, there's always public comment, and there's things that are happening in order to shape legislation on those topics. Candidly, most of us just have zero involvement in that and aren't really engaged, and we don't really even engage until the legislation either gets passed, doesn't get passed, or something happens or something changes. I think figuring out how you use some of these AI tools to both present that information in ways that is intuitive, get it pushed out so that people are aware what's happening, and also just curate it so that it's not just an overload of just information getting pushed out into the void. I think doing that could bring more people into the process of how decisions get made earlier, and as opposed to fighting the decisions after they're already in place, actually getting people a bit more involved and engaged in the decision-making process, so we get outcomes that are more reflective of what the general consensus is around these issues. And I'm not sure we've always received that. I think the second thing is that I think just purely adopting AI at the same rate as the private sector or others that are using it for commercial interests or business interests or other things. One is just being there and being even in the conversation. So what I mean by that is, today, if I run a company that produces large language models, or I produce some sort of AI, if all of my customers and all of my demand and everything is coming from the private sector, inherently that is going to dictate the overall trajectory of the product, how the technology is developed, how it gets used. I think one of the biggest things is anybody that's interested in social issues, just taking and applying the technology in your area, so that not only do you get the benefits of the technology, but you also get a seat at the table as a customer and a user of the technology. I think that puts you in a much better place to shift where those technologies, or at least nudge where those technologies are going, as opposed to, I think if you're on the outside looking in, it's a very difficult prospect to then be able to influence decisions that get made about the future of AI.
So inclusivity, simplicity, getting a seat at the table. Seems like there you see a lot of potential benefits. I know one superintendent I work with is trying to take all the sticky notes when they do community conversations with parents and stakeholders. They get like 20,000 sticky notes of suggestions. And so he's pumping that all into an AI system in order to synthesize the results. Whereas usually they never get synthesized. So you're just going by gut feel of what the community said, because the synthesis job is massive inside the bureaucracy. But that's fascinating to me. I'm hoping, my hope is that folks in my sector get engaged and start experimenting with AI in their job. We're a little bit, Rob, we're a little bit traumatized by some tech sector wealth coming. We have to, ask for money a lot of times, and with money usually comes strings. So I know I'll just speak for myself. I've had a lot of folks who made some money in tech come to me with their social solutions that were pretty bad. That often hinged on, hey, if every kid would just do my app or this app, they would suddenly, we'd solve, massive problems. So I think there's a skepticism born of experience of the tech sector. But for me, I'm also getting over that, because I think these tools are massively powerful, and this is a kind of a Prometheus moment. But have you had any of those experiences yourself?
Not just experiences. I catch myself doing that sometimes. My oldest daughter actually is helpful in this respect. She taught me about the Dunning-Kruger effect, and the fact that you tend to be overconfident when you understand the least about an issue, and I think many people just studying like what the Dunning-Kruger effect is and how it applies to your own life. I think all of us would be better off knowing about that and being aware of it. So I do experience that, and I think that it is coming from, in many cases, a good place, which is, people want to see institutions succeed. They want to see educational institutions succeed. They want to see a lot of social sector organizations succeed. So a lot of it is coming from a good place. I think it is what causes the tension is either lack of understanding, both a lack of understanding and a lack of willingness to learn about how those institutions were created, why they were created in that way, and how they operate. And so, kind of instead of meeting in the middle of, hey, here's where we're starting, here's where we want to go, how do we figure out a path there? There's a tendency to just want to jump to the final, the final path. So I think, in those cases, the only thing I would say is starting from a basis of, hey, I want to help, here's what I know, here's what I have to offer, and then having others kind of guide you on where to focus, as opposed to coming in and saying I have the answer. I think all of us would be better off if that's the path that folks took that were coming from the tech side.
I love that advice. Yeah, and I love the Dunning-Kruger reference, one of my favorite sociological theories. Very apropos there. Last question is, it was Marshall McLuhan who said the medium is the message, right? I think I'm paraphrasing a little there, but as Google and other things have changed our brains, right? The technology, the radio, the TV, all these technologies around us are not neutral in how they interact with us. I think personally, I'm stupid. I'm smarter and more stupid than I used to be because of technology. Um, what's your advice as someone who's been in the AI piece? Where can it make us smarter, and where should we be a little more cautious?
Yeah. So I'll say one thing just really quickly that's related to what you just asked, but I think is an important point, and then I'll get to kind of the broader thought on that. So the one thing that comes up all the time in AI context is around bias, and the fact that algorithms are biased, and we have to be careful around AI bias. You saw, the White House, the AI Bill of Rights, and some of the executive orders around AI. Um, I spend a lot of time in the private sector building algorithms. One thing you start to learn is the algorithms take on the bias of the institution, that it's exhibited historically. And one of the most concerning things to me is saying, well, we don't want to adopt the algorithms because they're biased. Well, inherently what you're doing then is you're just reverting to your old manual process, where instead of the bias being explicit in a way you could actually adjust for it over time like it would be in an algorithm, you just revert back to the implicit bias that was just hidden from view. And so I think the first thing I would just say is that's somewhat tangential to the question that you asked, but you mentioned bias earlier on, and I think that's an
Yeah.
important framing for the conversation on AI bias. um, More broadly, I have a book, Artificially Human, and my favorite chapter in that book that I wrote was one that I called like Us. And what that chapter is we spend a lot of time looking at how machines are becoming more like humans. It's okay, well, language models can now create stories or do analysis and do these things that humans could only do even 5 years ago. Or Dolly or Midjourney, these things can create images that only human artists could do, or produce music that only humans could do, or they even speak like us. We're very enamored by how machines are becoming more like humans. One of the things that doesn't get talked about a whole lot is how we're becoming more like machines. If you look at the average vocabulary of people, it's been falling fairly steadily, and that makes sense because we're engaging through keyboards, and your words per minute on a keyboard is just less than you can speak in a like human to human, and you need more efficient communication and more functional communication, and therefore your communication maybe isn't as articulate and in ways that we've valued historically. So, I think one of the things I find interesting is I'm not sure it's good or bad. I think it's just convergence. And what you're having is machines are becoming more like us. We're becoming more like them. Over time, there's going to be some kind of meeting in a way that probably makes it just easier for people to work with machines. And then it's a question of, what do we do together?
Oh, fascinating. That's a good place to leave it. It's a hopeful place, and I'm going to lean into the hope of that last comment, that we can live in harmony with our tech. Um, Rob,